Hello, good day everyone. By the way, I'm Agnes Ariate and I am the next reporter. So to continue our discussion today, I will report about the integrated approach activity enhancers. So when we say integrated activities, it means jointly planned, funded, and interwoven activities between research and extension to solve problems. So this includes the generation of knowledge and the transfer of information and technology. Also, the integrated approach helps students to get a unified view of reality and enhances their capability to acquire real life skills. So it does this by linking content between and among subject areas. So there is integration when students are able to connect what they are learning in one subject area to related content in another subject area. In other words, an integrated approach also has roots in early childhood education. So, where a hallmark for quality is the seamless interconnection of development domains and content areas. So, according to John Dewey, he claimed that learning could be more meaningful if content areas are blended for curriculum and instructions. So the use of unifying themes and real-life activities could lead to more relevant learning. So this is according to Dewey in 1938. And now, let's talk first building vocabulary. So, having a wide vocabulary gives you more than just the smugness that comes from knowing aglet is the name for the tiny piece of plastic at the end of the shoelace. So, it's about finding the right word, the one special word in a sentence, so that will transmit an image or feeling directly into reader's mind. Okay? So, let's look at 10 strategies we writers can use to expand our knowledge in our vocabulary. So first we have keep a vocabulary journal. So reading is an obvious vocabulary builder. But what do you do when you encounter an unfamiliar word? So for me, the issue with this approach was that most of the words were never encoded in my long-term memory. I knew it was unrealistic to memorize every new word I encountered. So I decided to try a different tactic. Okay? So I'd look up the definitions as I went along, but I'd only write down the words I could see myself using in my own writing. Okay? Also, I'd pick the three most interesting ones from my list. Open the document with my vocabulary journal and take the time to really get to know those three words. So that's what I did. Also, my vocab journal includes the original context, dictionary definition, etymology, usage in the news, and a practice sentence. So that's it. So next we have use flashcards. So we all know that Quizlet is a great free resource for flashcards that can be used across its website and mobile app. So you can make your own or find sets other people have created. So I recommended searching for SAT or GRE vocabulary. So Quizlet has a matching and testing feature so you can practice your knowledge. So that's a very helpful app. So you can always go old-fashioned and write paper flashcards, okay? Which I still like to use when I want to scribble down mnemonic clues. Like for example, I learned the word extemporaneous, meaning something that's improvised or made up on the spot. By associating it with a word of similar meaning, spontaneous. Okay? So third, we have learn word roots. So what does it mean? So digging up word elements such as Latin roots can help you dissect individual words to understand their meaning. Take the word antebellum. So ante means before and bellum denotes war. So antebellum means before a war. So, although it's most often used to refer to the plantation era South before the American Civil War. So that's an example. So you can then use this knowledge to better understand words that share those elements such as antecedent and belligerent. Okay? And next we have start your day with a new word. Okay, so what does it mean? So many online dictionaries have an email sign up where they can share daily definitions. So are you familiar with it, diba? So the word of the day app tells me a new word every morning. So it displays a basic definition and example sentences so that I don't get lost in etymology or start opening new tabs left and right. So sites like Merriam-Webster, are you familiar with that? Diba? Also host a number of fun word games and quizzes so you can use to test your knowledge and learn peculiar words. So that's an example. Next, we have delve into specialized terminology. Sometimes, the story demands that the character know how to ride a horse or that the reader can paint the landscape based on words alone. So every hobby or field of study comes with its own set of vocabulary. So learning that native language and applying it to your stories can better convince the audience of your world's reality. So you likely encounter the terms you need to know while you're conducting targeted research. But pay a special attention to the words your sources use in discussing the topic. So be assured that you know exactly what the terms mean and in what context to use them. Okay, so it's important. Also, reading articles and books on these subjects, talking to an expert, or even talking online or in-person classes can acquaint you with the necessary jargon. So when you understand the fields of basic vocabulary, it's easier to determine what search terms you need to use to learn more. After all, you don't know what you don't know. Okay, so that's very much important. And next, we have start a word bank and word hit list. So even we build our vocabularies, we don't use all of the words in our arsenal, leaning more heavily on some and entirely forgetting others. As Roy Peter Clark, author of Writing Toll says, all of us possess a reading vocabulary as big as lake, but draw from a writing vocabulary as small as a pond. So this is why I keep a word bank, a list of verbs, adjectives, and nouns I already know the meaning of, but that I don't use often. Okay, so that's an example. Next, we need to double check definitions. Okay, double check definitions means it's a part of writers' vocabulary growth is determining when they're misusing words and discovering alternative definitions of familiar words. So it's good to get in the habit of double checking word meanings when you're not 100% sure. So my word choice errors often come from me assuming I know the meaning of a word because of how it sounds. Diba? Sometimes we say that you know the word because of its sounds. Many times I'll catch myself saying or writing a word that feels right but that I'm not sure I could define. So that's when I know I need to look it up just to be sure. Okay? So be wary and check the dictionary. Okay? Next, we need to know the relationship between diction and tone. In general, your diction should match the character's voice or the story's narrative tone. So when writing a story with strong character voice, especially first person, you can pay special attention to their vocabulary. If the character has an interest in nature, their vocabulary list might include words like metamorphosis, parasite, glacial, molting, stemmed, blossomed, and germinated. So they might use figurative language that conceptualizes the word in a way that's familiar to them. So she was like morning glory, only opening up when times were bright. So that's an example. Okay, so next we have practice moderation. So what does it mean? Oh, so building your vocabulary is not about seeing how many fancy words you can pack into a single sentence. Like Mark Twain once said, don't use a $5 word when a 50-cent word will do. So moderation is the key. In fact, using only one or two standout words in a sentence will generate more power. Okay? So that's very much important. And then lastly, we have try a vocab writing exercises. So what does it mean? So if you'd like to further flex your word muscles, you can try creating a vocab story. Language can feel limited in its ability to express thoughts, but the more words you have at your disposal, the more opportunities you have to distill ideas into a digestible form. Okay? So that's all about the building vocabulary, the strategies in building our vocabulary. So now we're done talking about building vocabulary. So let's proceed to understanding the writer's technique. Okay. So if words are the raw materials of a writer's trade, literary devices are the tools the writer uses to craft these words into meaningful and or beautiful shape. Okay, so there are hundreds of these devices at a writer's disposal covering. So they cover every aspect of a writing process from word and sentence level or figurative language techniques to whole text level or the structural techniques. Okay? So, first we'll define each term, then we'll provide an example or two of it in use before finally giving a simple activity so we can use with your students to help them to consolidate their understanding of each device. So in this lesson, we'll take a look at the following literary devices in turn. So, first, we have allegory, allusion, flashback, foreshadowing, imagery, irony, juxtaposition, point of view, satire, and symbol. So first, let's talk about allegory. So what do we mean by allegory? So an allegory is when the characters and events of a story are used to convey a deeper hidden meaning which is often either moral or political. So that's an allegory. So writing an allegory involves climbing down the ladder of abstraction to bring clarity to abstract ideas by tying them to the characters and events of a story. So allegories are often used to express controversial or even dangerous opinions as they allow the writer to create some distance between themselves and the ideas being discussed. Okay? So, allegory, we can apply this in our discussion in class. So, what's an example of activity? So, we need to ask students about some of Aesop's well-known stories, like for example, the hare and the tortoise, the lion and the mouse. So, can they retell the stories briefly? Okay, so ask the students to discuss in smaller groups what they think the hidden meaning of each fable is. So that's an example of activity in allegory. Next, let's proceed to allusion. So what do we mean by allusion? An allusion is when the writer refers to the events or characters from another story. So this is done to provide context or give depth. So because the success of this device depends on the reader's familiarity with the text referred to, allusions are usually made to the most widely known text, which in the case of English include the Bible, the poems and plays of William Shakespeare. Okay? So, we can also apply allusion in teaching. So, we have here an activity, example of activity. So, in this activity, we can tell students they're going to hunt the allusions. So, challenge students to list all the allusions they come across over a period of a week. So, these allusions may appear in speech, print, or any form of popular culture. So, students can share and discuss their findings at the end of the week. Okay, so that is allusion. Now, let's talk about flashback. What is flashback? Okay, so in a flashback, the writer reveals to the reader something that happened before the present moment and the narration. So flashbacks are often used to bring context to current events in a story. So this structural device can allow the writer to withhold pertinent pieces of information from the reader or the viewer to reveal the suitably dramatic moments, thereby increasing the impact of the narrative. Okay? So, we can use also foreshadowing in class. So, what do we mean by foreshadowing? So, while the flashback looks backward, the literary device of foreshadowing hints at things yet to come in a story. Okay, so that is foreshadowing. So, foreshadowing can create anticipation and expectation in a story. So, it can create a suspenseful atmosphere and motivate the reader to continue to read to find out what happens. Okay? So, foreshadowing, we can apply this in class also. So what is an example of activity? So one of the most common types of foreshadowing is known as treacherous gun and comes from the famous playwrights of quoted writing advice. So if in the first act you have hung a pistol on the wall, then in the following one, it should be fired. So otherwise, don't put in there. So in this practice activity, organize your students into groups and instruct them to write down the endings of 3 stories they are familiar with, like books or in movies. So now in their groups, challenge them to create an introduction scene to the book or movie that contains Chekhov's gun type. Okay, so foreshadowing of the ending. So that's an example of a story. So we can use that in foreshadowing. Next, let's proceed in irony. What do you mean by irony? So there are 3 main types of irony. We have dramatic irony. This is when the reader has more knowledge than the character. We have situational irony. This is where there is a contrast between expectations and reality. We have also the verbal irony, when there is an incongruity between the superficial meaning of the thing said that what is actually meant. So that is the 3 types of irony. So we can apply irony in teaching activities. So a good activity to help students develop clear understanding of different types of irony is to organize the students into groups and challenge them to create their own ironic scenarios. So students should write these scenarios down, so they can then pass them to another group who has to identify what type of irony is being demonstrated in each scenario. Okay, so that's an example of irony. Next, let's proceed to juxtaposition. So what do we mean by juxtaposition? So juxtaposition involves placing 2 ideas, characters, places, or events side by side to encourage the reader to compare and contrast them. Most often, it's used to highlight the difference between the 2 things, but sometimes it's used to imply a link between 2 things we would ordinarily connect. Okay? So, juxtaposition teaching activities. So, what is an example of this? So, we can find main examples of juxtaposition in our everyday speech. For example, when people realize that they hold differing views and the further debate is futile, so they might say, "We'll agree to disagree." So, we might also compose our own examples. Like, for example, we might write, "She had high hopes for their future together, but her dark past haunted her still." So that's an example. So we can organize our students into groups and challenge them to find as many examples of juxtaposition as they can and to list them. So they can organize their examples into 3 categories. So what are these? So examples from literature, examples from everyday speech, example of students compose themselves. So that's an example. And we can encourage students to share their work when they have finished. Okay, so that is all about for so ito na example. And next, we have point of view. So what is point of view? Point of view is the perspective from which a story is told. So a student can identify a story by answering the question, who is telling the story? So we have complete guide to point of view here. But here are the need to know facts below. So there are many possible point of views from which to tell a story. So some of the main ones are first person. So first person is the story is told from the point of the main character. We have I, we, our, or etc. Next, we have the second person. The narrator speaks directly to the reader, like you. So you are the second person. Next, we have the third person. An external narrator tells the story. He, she, they, and etc. So there are lots of variations on point of view to and to for students to gain a good grasp on this device. So we'll take lots of explicit teaching as well as practice. So what's an example of point of view activity? So a simple way for students to practice identifying and writing from different point of view is to take a passage from a book, identify the point of view being used, and, and then rewrite it from a variety of different point of views. Okay, so next we have satire. What do we mean by satire? So the term satire can refer to a distinct literary genre as well as the literary device. So here, we'll concern ourselves exclusively with the device. Okay, so satire is the skillful use of humor to mock or ridicule a person. So an idea or an institution by exposing or criticizing it. So it's often used in conjunction with other literary devices such as irony and juxtaposition. So its purpose isn't just to entertain, but to inform, and at times it can contain a call to action. Okay? So what's an example of satire teaching activity? So we can told our student to read through some more examples of Ambrose versus satirical definitions. The Devil's Dictionary is freely available online. Then task the students with devising some satirical definitions for commonplace words you list on the board. So the words birthday, graduation, and marriage might be a good place to start. Okay? So next, lastly, I think this is last, symbolism. So what do we mean by symbolism? So when a writer uses symbolism in their work, they're ascribing meanings to objects beyond that of their original functions or literal meanings. So the use of symbolisms in literature adds layers of meaning to the work, allowing for it to be read at different levels by the reader. So symbolism can be developed in a work through the use of other literary devices, particularly figurative speech devices such as metaphor and simile. Okay? So what is the example of symbolism teaching activity? So students need to learn to understand that symbols use one thing to stand for another. So for this game, divide the class into small groups and provide each with a different list of nouns. So the students should then work in groups to create a visual symbol for each of the nouns on their list. Okay? For example, if a group is working on the word school, they might draw a pencil-shaped building with children peeping out the windows. So we can easily differentiate this activity by altering the difficulty level of the words used. Like for example, you might use more abstract nouns such as jealousy for more advanced students. Okay? To wrap up literary devices, okay, to sum it up, the above is not an exhaustive list of structural literary devices, but did represent the most common and the most useful ones for our students to focus on. Okay, so if our students understand both the literary devices here and those in our accompanying article and figurative language, they'll be able to competently interpret their use in the work of others, as well as be able to employ them in their own writing. So I think I'm done. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. I hope you've learned something from my discussions about building vocabulary and the understanding the writer's technique. So thank you so much, and God bless everyone.
Good morning, Mom. Good morning, classmates. I am Elamir Albucolon, and this time I was tasked to report the topic 3, which is the author's testimony. When examining the notion of testimony within a literary context, several major issues beg consideration. Questions of narrative authority, judgment, and intended audience emerge as crucial to any attempt at understanding the term. However, unlike mere recollection, which concerns itself largely with simply retelling or revisiting past events, testimony revolves around and is driven by one major idea: truth. Meaning to say, testimony is driven by truth. It is closely aligns itself to the presentation of truth, morality. The author does not simply tell a story to an audience. One provides evidence of the truth. whether it is intentional or not, because of its legal connotations. Testimony is inherently tainted by notions of the ethical. The notions of narrative authority and accuracy arise from such testimonial literature. From this perspective, it is important to notice the role of a writer who also being a witness. It is not only an advocate of facts, experiences, and feelings. He or she is affiliated with alone, but also a guarantor of existential authenticity. The writer needs to be both testify to what happened and attest the truthfulness of his or her message. We have also another definition of testimony. It is from the Oxford English Dictionary, which defines personal or documentary evidence or attestation in the support of a fact or statement. A testimony is an assertion made by someone who has knowledge or experience in a particular matter. For example, in the law, testimony is a form of evidence that is obtained from a witness who makes a solemn statement or declaration of facts. Meaning, a testimony is a statement or endorsement given by someone who has a logical connection to the topic and who is a credible source. It is used in various contexts for a wide range of purposes. According to Gonzalo Subizano, testimony is considered to be a form of self-narrative. Testimony usually implies an external audience which maintains an interest in deeming the narrating figure's recollections of past events truthful or false. So it is really obvious that testimony speaks with the truth. It is speak with the facts. It is the first-hand authentication of facts or evidences. One of the examples of literary testimonial is Lolita of the Confession of a White-Wadded Male by Vladimir Nabokov. It is a story about Humbert Humbert, a literature professor in his late 30s, obsessed with a 12-year-old Dolores Hayes. The novel consists of a preface, two parts, and the author's annotation. Let's now proceed to its literary analysis. So in Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita, the narrator Humbert testifies to his interaction with Lolita in an attempt to relate to his fictional readers. The story is presented as a written account. The truth, the full, the experienced reality of his interaction with Dolores Hayes. At the outset of the novel, he states, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, exhibit number 1 is what the syrups, the misinformed, simple, noble wench, syrups envied. Look at this tangle of thorns. Not only does he bear witness to the events of his life as they occurred, but in narrating them, and testifying them aloud, and he offers them up for judgment." I hope you learned from my lesson, and this time, I will now say thank you for listening.
Good day everyone, especially to our instructor, Mrs. Lucinita Virtudes. Today I am going to have a discussion with regards to critical reading. I include here some strategies in reading as well. Now to start, let us first define critical reading from different sources. Okay. Critical reading means that a reader applies certain processes, models, questions, and theories that result in enhanced clarity and comprehension. Critical reading means engaging in what you read by asking yourself questions such as, what is the author trying to say? Or, let's say, what is the main argument being presented? Now, according to the source skillsyouneed.com 2022, critical reading involves presenting reasoned argument that evaluate and analyzes what you have read. Now, to read critically, it is to exercise your judgment about what you are reading, and that is not taking anything you read at a face value. If this will be applied to a work or literature, for example, it can become the foundation for a detailed textual analysis. With scholarly articles, critical reading can help you evaluate their potential reliability as future sources. Next, critical reading can help you hone your own argumentation skills as well, because it requires you to think carefully about which strategies are effective for making arguments. And in our age of social media and instant publication, thinking carefully about what we say is necessity. Just like the saying, think before we act. Think before you act. When reading academic material, you will be faced with the author's interpretation and opinion, right? Different authors will naturally have different slants. You should always examine what are you reading critically and look for limitations, omissions. By the way, when we say omissions, it is something that is neglected. And also inconsistencies, oversights, and arguments against what you are reading. Well, in academic circles, while you are still a student, you will be expected to understand different viewpoints and make your own judgments based on what you have read. Just like, for example, when we are doing a poem critiquing or so on, and in analyzing the form and structure of the writing, the language used, as well as the contents, critical reading implies being able to reflect on what a text says, what it describes, and what it signifies. Um, let's go back to what I said earlier. Yes, we experience critiquing a text, critiquing a poetry, critiquing a prose, or whatever text it is. Now, when we are critiquing, we are not just including who are the authors, what are the elements of the story. We are also including our opinions and our judgments based on our book or the text that we read. Now let us proceed to the strategies of critical reading. Based on my resources, there are seven critical reading strategies. First, we have previewing. Previewing means learning about a text before really reading it. It's like reviewing. Second, we have contextualizing. Contextualizing is placing a text in its historical, biographical, and cultural context. The third one, we have questioning. Questioning is asking questions about the content or the author. The fourth one, we have reflecting. Reflecting means examining your personal responses. The fifth one, we have outlining and summarizing. This is to identify the main ideas and restating them in your own words, or should we say, rephrasing. Next, we have evaluating. Evaluating is testing the logic of a text as well as its credibility and emotional impact. And last but not the least, comparing and contrasting. This is the exploring of likenesses and differences between the texts to understand them better. And that's it for the 7 strategies of critical reading. In conclusion with my discussions, critical reading in college academic expectations change from what you may have experienced in high school. What we have experienced in high school. As the quantity of work expected of you increases, the quality of the work also changes. You must do more than just understand course material and summarize it on an exam. You will be expected to engage seriously with new ideas by reflecting on them, analyzing them, critiquing them, making connections, drawing conclusions, or finding new ways of thinking about them. Educationally, you are moving into deeper waters. Learning how to read strategically and critically will help you to swim. And that ends my part in the report. Thank you for listening, and I hope that I give you some informations that you need to be aware of and to learn. Thank you.